talk actually has its genesis 3 years ago now. It was in February 2010. I was living in Wisconsin at the time. I'd applied to a job at Central Washington University. I was just about to fly out for an interview at Central Washington University, and I was doing what all job applicants do. I went through the webpage to see what kind of school this was. And I don't know how I went from the math department to some other place, but I ended up on the Darwin Days page. It talked about how people from all over campus give talks about Darwin and evolution and related topics, and I thought, what an interesting school. I think I'd like to go teach at a place where people from all over campus get together to talk about interesting things. And my second thought was, I know 2 talks I want to give if I get the job. The first was a talk about the relationship between Darwin and Euler. It's what I talked about last year. Euler is the person who I usually study when I study the history of science, and there's this connection that I think is very little talked about and very little known. And the second thing that popped into my head was that celebrating Darwin's birthday misses something. Darwin, of course, was born on the 12th of February. A lot of people were born on the 12th of February. I suppose roughly 1/3% of all people, right, are born on the 12th of February. But some very famous people were born on the 12th of February, and another one was a biologist, like Darwin was. His name is Jan Swammerdam. First of all, he has a cool name. Second of all, he's more important than I think we sometimes say. He did a lot. He doesn't get a lot of play in modern textbooks, and since we're having a day to celebrate biologists born on the 12th of February, it seems like we should broaden it slightly and fit him in. He worked not exactly in evolution, but at things connected to evolution, and this really is the genesis of this for me. I decided to talk about this, evolution before Darwin. Now, in a general audience, if you stop someone on the street, they might tell you that Darwin invented the theory of evolution. In a room like this, very few people, of course, think that. We generally know better. But trying to understand what happened before is still sort of interesting. If Darwin and other people came up with a theory of evolution, why did they try to come up with a theory of evolution? Why did they think such a thing was worthwhile or important or should be done in the first place? And I want to sort of answer that, and answer this in a sort of a playful romp through 17th century science. I'm going to look at some interesting things and figures and people who are involved and just see what happens. Before even this, if we're going to talk about the beginning of the theory of evolution, we could start with the word. How about this word, evolution? From the Latin, it comes from the word unrolling. The vol should remind you of revolve. That's what your tires do. E is out of or away from. This is the Spanish de or the French de. So we're coming out, rolling away from is evolution. And it turns out, biologists, it's not just a biology term. It's also a math term. That's right, yeah. Mathematicians can talk about the evolute of a curve. The evolute of a curve is the unrolling of the curve. What you do is you take a curve, you pretend there's a string wrapped around it, and you slowly pull the string, and you look at the shape that it follows. So we take a circle and pull the string here. As we pull, we're always keeping it as tight as we can. The string's wrapped around, and we get this beautiful little spiral. This spiral is the evolute of a curve. And were we 17th century or 18th century mathematicians, we would spend a lot of time talking about the evolute of curves. It was a very popular subject at the time. Can you find the evolute of a parabola? Can you find a curve whose evolute is itself? The opposite of an evolute is an involute. What is the curve you would have to unroll to get this thing? If I give you a curve, can you find the involute? Is there a curve that's not equal to its own evolute, but is the evolute of its evolute? All of these were good questions, and all of these were answered. Now, this is not a talk about that. It's actually somewhat tricky math to do this, but if you get bored later in this talk and want something to do, let this be your challenge. Can you find a curve which is the evolute of itself? So draw it, get your pen, imagine rolling something, and see if you can get the same shape. All right, this is the term in mathematics. Where does the term come from? We know what it means. It turns out you can trace this back to 1647. I got out my Oxford English Dictionary and double-checked this. 1647 is the first time it occurred in the English language. If Darwin Day is a day to celebrate things from across campus, we could maybe take a brief segue also into the world of literature. Did I see where this comes from? It's a poem. It's a poem here by a man named Henry Moore. He's trying to write about the immortality of the soul. Henry Moore is trying to explain the relationship between the soul and the body. Body, vital corpality from We have from hence our souls be co-unite with worlds. This is the word spirit. Spirit and body. With these herself she has died. Her body is struck. Here it is. By evolution. Henry Moore, ladies and gentlemen. This is the first time the word appears in the English language. Now, this poem actually is somewhat interesting. I flipped through this, and there is a lot of neat argument about mind and body and spirit and relationship between them just after Descartes is writing about the same things. I suspect if you're a biology major with an English background and want something fun to play with, sort of think there's something here. So the whole text is online. If you can look this up, and this is at least the beginning of the word. If we're going to have a theory of evolution, we need the word to begin with, and we have it now. We have a word, evolution. And what is really evolution? I'm just going to use this fairly simple thing as my definition. There is change in inherited characteristics over time. We have living things, they make new living things. Sometimes they change characteristics, those can be inherited. Let's just take this basic idea and say, if we're going to have this basic idea, what do we need first to get this basic idea, to even ask the question of why this would happen? And my claim today, in this somewhat sporadic and biased romp, is that there are three big things that we need, three big ideas and questions that we should have if we're going to try to find a theory of evolution. The first thing we should decide is that the Earth changes over time. The second is that if you look in different layers of the Earth, if it changes over time, the different layers came at different times, that there are fossils in them, and that the fossils are different in the different layers. The third idea is maybe slightly more subtle. You have to believe that fossils came from living things. If we could accept all three of these, then we'll be able to look and say, wow, living things, since the fossils are living things were different in the past, therefore they must have changed, therefore we must need a theory. We need to somehow establish these three things before it even makes sense to ask a question about what evolution is. And so let's look at these three things. These are part of the prehistory of evolution. Can we understand them at all? And I want to start with, well, this first question. Are fossils animals? Now, maybe arguably no. No, they're rocks is maybe an answer. But did it come from animals? Are they related to animals in some way? They certainly look like animals, don't they? But is that enough, really, to convince you? There's two teams here in the history of science. They're going to square off and have a debate that will last for at least 7 centuries. On Team No, our leader, the lead-off hitter, the person who will start us out, is probably Avicenna. You could trace this back to Aristotle, but Aristotle's arguments seem too far afield to me, really. This is the 11th century late medieval thinker who wrote about lots and lots of stuff. He said, there is in the world a stone-making force. There are forces, aren't there? Magnetism is a force. It's a force that pulls on us. He doesn't have a concept of gravity, but that must be a force. It's a force that keeps things going when they move. There's also a stone-making force. It makes lots of shapes, and sometimes the shapes that just look interesting. That won't be quite enough for a later thinker. After all, stone-making force just makes stone. What we really need, says Albert Monnius, he's one of my heroes. Albert the Great, his name means. We're in the 13th century now. This guy will go on to write a commentary on all of Aristotle. So Aristotle wrote on everything. He updates all of this and brings Aristotle fully into the medieval world. He says there is in this world a vital force. There is this permeating force, lots of places, that makes life and makes things that are like life. This is the vital force. If you accept the vital force, a lot of problems in science are solved. Here's one of them, and it's one we'll come back to in a few slides. If you have decaying meat, and you watch it, what you'll notice is flies come out of it. Why? Well, how about a vital force? When left alone, things make life. And the vital force could work on rocks, too. It'll make rocks shaped like life. The problem, of course, is it's not a good scientific theory. It's so broad, you can't ask questions with it, you can't test it, you can't really explain much of it, and so it's not a good thing to last for long. But all of these people, and there are others on Team No, their big argument is not really a positive argument, but a negative one. How could fossils be animals? After all, how could the animals have gotten to all the places that fossils are? You go to the top of a mountain and you find rocks shaped like fish. Really? Do you think there were fish on top of the mountain? Clearly there weren't, and so you can't have them. Now, there's an easy counter-argument to this. If you are a scholastic, or a medieval, or an early modern natural scientist, if you are a philosopher, the argument is we know exactly how fish got to the top of the mountain. Right? There was a big flood. At one point, water covered all the mountains, so fish swam everywhere, including the tops of the mountains. If we accept this, maybe there's not a problem. And the first person who wants to go on the other side to think about this, and who's not okay with the biblical flood, is Leonardo da Vinci. He thinks he knows how fish got to the top of the mountain, and he's not okay with the flood. He's not okay with the flood, and in his notebooks there's some really careful reasons for why he doesn't like the idea of the flood. For example, if you go up, you can find things that look like clamshells on top of the mountain. Some of them are whole clamshells, and some of them are clamshells that are torn apart into pieces. It's what happens on the beach, right? You walk on the beach, you find some whole clamshells and some pieces of clamshells. Think a flood strong enough to cover the world could have done that? Torn some to pieces, but gently picked up others. It just seems weird. Also, there are little trails next to some of them, and Da Vinci himself actually climbed mountains and looked at these. There are trails next to them that look like tracks. It looks like they actually walked here, and that just doesn't seem like what would be happening if there were floodwaters. But he thinks he knows how they got up there. See, Da Vinci himself was working on a theory of the Earth, and his theory of the Earth matched a theory of the human body. There are fluids in the human body, and they move around, and the heart pumps them, and the fluids go to the top of the head and the bottom of the feet. They move back and forth, and if the human body can do this, why can't the Earth? Perhaps the Earth itself is pumping fluids throughout it. This is starts somewhere inside of the Earth that we can't see. They're pumped up through mountains. Is there a pump inside the Earth? Maybe. Or maybe they're squeezed up, and he has whole pages about what it would mean for rocks to squeeze things up, like, I don't know, it's a smooth tissue of the throat or something. In fact, at one point, I've seen this claim. I don't know if this claim is true, and find your nearest art historian to double check. But the claim that I've seen is as he was trying to work out the relationship between the human body moving fluids around and the earth moving water around, this is when he painted the Mona Lisa. And the part of the Mona Lisa that we usually ignore is the background. And the background is all water. There's flowing water, and there's a mountain up here, and kind of, you look at a better picture, see a bit of water up there. And maybe it's supposed to be mirroring exactly what she's doing. Kind of cool, really. Again, I don't know if it's true, but other smart people seem to think that it's true, and if so, it's sort of interesting. Da Vinci is trying to make this argument. He's not the only person who's pretty convinced, however, that fossils are animals. Another guy is Nicholas Steno. He is going to be the first person on our list of really important dead scientists who should be more well-known than they are. Nicholas Steno. Nicholas, or Niklaus, his real name is Niels. He was Dutch, so any sort of variant of this he's often known by today. I have a picture for him, too. For Da Vinci, our picture is the Mona Lisa. How do we match that for this guy? Nicholas Steno. He got his own doodle on the Google page a couple years ago. This was in honor of Steno's birthday. Couple years. You see, Steno did a lot of things, and in fact, I would claim, if you want to tune out the next 5 or so minutes of the talk, you can learn all you want to know about Steno by a close study of this picture. Alright, let's see if I can convince you of this. Who is this guy? Nicholas Steno. He came in 1666 to Florence. 1666, he came to Florence. This is both an exciting time and an exciting place. 1666 is the year that Isaac Newton left college because of the Black Plague, went home, and invented calculus and optics and all of modern physics. This is not the story we're telling today, but he did this in about a year, Isaac Newton. Newton then went back to school and didn't tell anybody what he had done. See, Newton had figured out how the world worked at that point and really didn't give a damn about anybody else. This is an exciting time. Florence is an exciting time. Florence is the height of the Renaissance, and there are texts being discovered all the time. There are people looking back. Florence is the site of the Florentine Camerata. If you remember your history of music classes, these are the people who are reading the old Greek texts. They discover that Greek music could move the emotions of the listener. And they wondered if they could do that too. Out of this would come opera. One of the people in the Florentine Camerata was a person who laid different cello strings on the ground, plucked them one at a time, and tried to figure out what properties made the best cello strings. He would go on to have a son, Galileo. This is huge. So coming into this time is a very good time and a very good place to be. And one of the first people that Steno meets tells him about this new academy, l'Accademia del Cimento, the Science Academy. Here, he meets somebody else. He meets Francesco Redi. He finds out what Redi is doing, an experiment. I think I've seen this described, Redi's experiment, as the worst smelling experiment in the history of science. But it will be telling for Steno. It will help convince him that maybe something can be done. You see, he walked in to Redi's lab. Redi was pretty excited to show him this. And what Redi had done is gotten dung from lots of different animals, gotten rotten meat from various animals, and put them in jars. This is right, again, I don't know, maybe biologists find this less horrifying than I do. I would strongly dislike walking into a room like this. But he didn't just do this, he carefully controlled what was going on. You see, he sealed some of the jars, and he lightly covered some of the veil, and he left some open. And the goal is to watch and see if it makes a difference. Right? Look at this, he's controlling for a variable. Now, some people describe this, and this is certainly has one of the few things in science that has the claim to be the first controlled experiment. Why it took until the 1660s for anyone to bother controlling for a variable is perhaps a topic for another talk. This seems so obvious. But this is it. He wanted to watch. In particular, he was interested in would they make maggots. So not only is it smell gross, it's soon going to look gross in this room. What he found, well, you won't be surprised to know what he found. The open ones made maggots. The lightly covered ones made maggots. The sealed ones didn't. It looks like maggots aren't a natural property of rotting meat. It looks like they must somehow sneak in and then come out of the rotten meat again. Maybe it's the only explanation. And not a lot of people believe this. It doesn't have a huge effect, but it certainly does affect Steno. He is convinced that science is all the more powerful than he maybe believed before. He then gets to do another first in the history of science. He's the first person to dissect a shark. The Grand Duke Ferdinand, is given a shark. Some fisherman catches it or finds it on the beach or something. The Duke presumably says, what am I going to do with this? Then he remembers he has his own science academy, so he ships it off to the science academy. The shark goes to Steno. Steno starts to pull it apart. The first thing he does is pull out the teeth, and he has a huge surprise. You see, he looks at the tooth of a shark, and he says, I've seen this before. But not in a shark. Remember, there aren't museums, there aren't pictures. No one actually knows what shark teeth look like. The only people who know don't last long enough to tell other people what shark teeth look like. And so he looks at this and he says, I've seen this before. You see, here's the tooth of the shark he pulls out, and this is a tongue stone. Everyone knows about tongue stones. They come largely from the eastern Mediterranean. This is everyone, of course, in Steno's day. I'd never heard of these until recently. Largely from the eastern Mediterranean, they're found on islands like Malta and Cyprus. Largely, they're good luck. They look like they have an interesting shape, don't they? They look sort of special. You can imagine they might be good luck. But they look just like the tooth, and this is extremely puzzling, right? Why do rocks in the eastern Mediterranean look so much like teeth in the mouth of a shark? And this really, I was thinking, how could it not, right? They're made of different things. This is also, they're clearly not the same. The teeth are made of, well, tooth stuff, and the rocks are made of rock stuff, and you can tell that these are apart. And so to fix this, he develops the first theory of fossilization. How do tooths turn into stone? And he has this idea that sediments sort of leach in. It's a really clever idea. Once he starts thinking about sediments moving from place to place, it occurs to him that maybe also the sediments that are flowing over a tooth and eventually going into it might also flow over parts of the land and go into part of it. And he develops his own theory of sedimentation. First idea that the geological record is a record that's made up of layers, dates to one guy and a shark staring at his teeth. And then he tries to really be careful about this and draws a whole series of pictures. This is from one of his books. And this is supposed to be the geology of Tuscany. And you can see these layers A, B, C, D, and this one happens first, and then maybe some stuff kind of fills in, and then some rocks get in, and then more layers come up. He's really trying to be very careful here. And it's cool, right? At the time he's done, we have the idea that things come in layers, and he even starts to notice the fossils in the layers when he goes out and looks. When you go back to the Google Doodle, you'll see this, right? There are different layers in the earth. There are fossils in some of them. And so by the time Steno has finished with his work, a big part of what we need for the prehistory of evolution is finished. His conclusion is living things have changed over the course of time. No, he doesn't convince everybody. This is not a well-regarded or a well-known theory, but he convinces some people. Christian Huygens up in Amsterdam likes the theory. Gottfried Leibniz likes the theory. Some of the big hitters in the 17th century are convinced by this. Everybody else, of course, will have to wait for this to be almost independently rediscovered 100 years later. But the stage at this point is set, and we now have a new question. Life changes, let's accept that, but where does new life come from? This is the other big question for a 17th century biologist, and the question could be put this way: why are some things alive and not others? Take wood. Some wood is born. right? It's made in a board. It's clearly not alive. Other pieces of wood are in a tree, and those, well, they are alive. Some of them can grow and change and undergo metabolic processes, and not others. And why is this? This is a huge question. Well, Aristotle tried to answer it. Aristotle said it's the male seed. It provides an immaterial, formal cause to the egg's development. Remember Aristotle, he had 4 causes. The formal cause sort of says the shape of something determines what it is. Right? How did that get to be a table? Answer, well, it's shaped like a table. The formal cause was sort of the least impressive of the 4 causes. Descartes would reject Aristotle. Descartes wants to build mechanistic philosophy. I can have a reason and a scientific series of logical arguments for why things be. So formal causes are really on the out, but what's going to replace them? How are we going to solve this? And what we'll need then is a new solution. We'll need someone to step in and save the day, someone to come up with a new way to explain where life comes from. Now, this person was born on Darwin's birthday. He was born on February 12th, and I want to stop for no reason other than it will amuse me and tell you what people who were born on the 12th of February. See, it's a good day to be born. 12th of February, for example, was the birthday of Cotton Mather. This is a 17th century preacher in the Americas. Not a very nice man. He was involved in burning witches at the Salem witch trial. He tried to get people to stop marrying Native Americans because he didn't want to dilute Christian blood. On the other hand, he wasn't all bad. He was also involved in the first controlled medical experiment. He and Benjamin Franklin got together when the smallpox was coming, convinced 1,000 people to get vaccinated for smallpox using the cow's scab, disgusting technique that was popular at the time. And then waited to see if they got sick, and not many of them got sick. They actually counted people who did the vaccinated people who did this. Mather and Benjamin Franklin who did this. He's a neat guy. Alexander Petrov was born on the 12th of February. This is one for the chess players. If you do the chess opening where white moves the king's pawn out 2 places and black does the same, and white uses the knight to attack the black pawn, and black uses his knight to attack the white pawn in the same sort of mirror image way, that's the Petrov opening. Yeah, he's the guy who started this. He's probably the best player in the world in the early 19th century. One person I really like, this is Alice Roosevelt. She's the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt and the wife of Nicholas Longworth, who would be the Speaker of the House of Representatives for a while. She lived into the 80s. She eventually moved into an apartment in Washington, D.C., and apparently she was sort of the hub of gossip in the city for about 60 years. Everyone came in, she shared secrets back and forth, and it ended up being a mover and a shaker. You might remember Franco Zeffirelli, if you were alive before the new Romeo and Juliet, and you watched the old Romeo and Juliet, he won the Pulitzer Prize, what do you call it? What's the movie one? The Oscars. He won the Oscar for directing this. Charles Van Doren was born on the 12th of February. The hero of Quiz Show, if you can remember this, who would go on to be an important contributor to Encyclopedia Britannica. And we all remember this. Judy Blume, also born on this day. None of these are the big 3. There are 3 big names that are born on the 12th of February. 2 of them we talk about a lot. We have this shocking coincidence that Charles Darwin and Abraham Lincoln are born on the same date and the same year. You believe the tenets of astrology, that the position of the planets and the day you're born affects something of your future life? If you wanted evidence, what would it be? It might be something like, if you find 2 people born on the same day, they'll both be, for example, the 2 most influential figures of the 19th century. I don't know, I find this very shocking. But there's one more, there's one off the list, and this is the one I've been thinking about since I saw Darwin Day in 2012. Jan Swammerdam is born on this day. He's a person I really want to turn to here. I'm guessing his friends called him this. There's no evidence. But he was fascinated by insects when he was young. It annoyed the heck out of his dad. His dad wanted him to go into medicine. He never did. His dad wanted him to earn a good living. He never did. This is really all he wanted, was to look at bugs, try to figure out how they behaved. And in about 1666, that same fateful year we talked about earlier, he read Robert Hooke's new book, The Micrographia, and he got the idea that you could look at things far more closely using a microscope. He started using the microscope to do dissections, and what he found was just amazing. There's this time in 1609 when Galileo first points a telescope at the sky, and every day he sees something no one had thought of before. Right? The moon's not a perfect sphere. Wow! Venus has phases. Holy cow! Jupiter has moons! No one knew these things! This is the microscope version of this. 60 years later, Swammerdam goes through the same thing. He'll go on to write this book, the Insectorum Generalis, the history of insects. in general. And he gets this remarkable image, right? He's really seeing a lot of what's going on, and he starts to find a lot of things very quickly. He first discovers that the king bee has ovaries. It's clearly the bee in charge, and the person in charge is clearly the king. That's pretty obvious to all thinkers. And what he discovers is it's not. This is the gender scandal. The bees let women run things. He then looks inside of a snail and finds that the worms inside of the snail themselves have worms in them. Worms so small you can't see have worms so small you can't see. Jonathan Swift later wrote this. So naturalists observe a flea has smaller fleas upon him prey, and these have smaller fleas to bite him, and so proceed ad infinitum. Inspired by things like this. It seems like the farther down you look, the more animals that you find. He then goes on to, once again, debunk the idea of spontaneous generation, the thing that Steno did before, that flies could just appear out of nowhere. And then finally, this thing, which it turns out was new, that when insects go through 4 different stages in their life cycle, it's the same insect the whole time. It seems before this, it was popular to think that the larva died, and from that death emerged a pupa. It's almost easier to believe than the other way, that something can change so dramatically from one to another. But he proved it, and he proved it by publicly dissecting a caterpillar. He went to Freveno. Freveno is his patron, the person who paid for him to do all of his work. Freveno got some friends together, and in front of all of them, Swammerdam dissected a caterpillar and found little butterfly parts. Little future butterfly legs, things that are clearly going to become wings. They're not fully developed, of course, but they're there. They're there, and this is one of the pieces of evidence. He went on to write this, that a butterfly is enclosed and hidden in a caterpillar and perfectly contained within. It sets him thinking. If caterpillars are inside of butterflies, what else can be inside of other things? Then more. In nature, this is him still trying to come up and wrestle with this idea. There's no generation, there's only propagation, there's only the growth of parts. This also not only is helped us by biology, in this original sin is explained. All men were contained in the organs of Adam and Eve. So now you know why you're born with original sin. It's not some weird theology thing, it's because of genetics. Now, this last line is very controversial. What exactly does Swammerdam mean by this? Most people say he means this thing called Preformationism, which we'll come to in 4 slides. Other people say that's a really bad misreading. I should make a confession here. I'm doing something I strongly dislike doing. I'm giving a history of science talk. We're talking about Swammerdam's book, and I'm talking more about Swammerdam's book in a little bit. I have not read Swammerdam's book. It was only the last couple of days I discovered there was an English translation. The whole thing's in Latin, which is a language I read very slowly. And so I can't comment well on the argument here. I'll give you the traditional interpretation and tell you reasonable people disagree, and then you can look this up later. It turns out both the Latin and the English translation are in the library, that wonderful History of Science microfiche collection that we have. I want to look at Swammerdam's work then, but first I want to tell you how we know what he wrote. It's only by the skin of the teeth of the book that we have this at all. It was almost lost. It was almost lost. His work, the big one we're talking about, is the Bibel der Natura. This is easy to translate, right? It's the Bible of nature. Nature's Bible, possibly nature's book. He wrote it in Dutch. And he finished it in 1679. He then sent it off to a translator. He wanted to have the thing rendered into Latin so it could be read by people of Europe. The problem was he died. He died in 1690, and his works were all bequeathed to Freveno, the same person who had supported him for so many years. And Freveno decided he would do honor to this man and try to publish it. There were problems and problems and problems. First, the translator wouldn't give the manuscript back. It's not clear why. I can't find any good description of why this is. They refused to let Freveno have it. So he sued. Lawsuit for 2 years. And waiting, everyone knows courts take a long time. Eventually he gets it back. He works hard on this for 9 years, but it's hard to turn someone else's notes into a book, even carefully prepared notes into a book. Freveno dies, and his papers are bought by Joubert. Joubert is actually the painter to the king, the official portraitist. He has money, he has connections, he thinks it'll be nice to have these. Joubert takes the works and ignores them for almost 30 years. They sit on a shelf somewhere. Time goes on. Time goes on. Eventually, Joubert dies, and no one quite knows what happens to the papers. Joubert's papers themselves seem to be scattered, but they show up about 6 years later. There's this imposter, this scam artist who finds him, and decides that he's going to claim them as his own. He's going to be the person who published these great works. A man named Herman Boerhaave, and watch for his name because you'll see it again soon. Boerhaave discovers this. He's a prominent physician in Amsterdam at the time. Thinks this is a shame, hunts the scam artist down. It's not clear if he paid him off or threatened him or something, but Boerhaave got the works, himself decided to publish them, took another 10 years, and finally the work appears. 57 years after the death of Swammerdam, finally this work is published. And so he doesn't have the immediate effect he probably would have had he been able to live a couple more years. But here it is, the picture from the front. The Idol of Nature from Jan Swammerdam. By the way, if you pronounce his name wrong, you get to call him Swammerdam of Amsterdam, which is just fun. Alright, so this is where we were last. Remember this. We have this idea that men are contained in the organs of Adam and Eve. What did he mean by this? And one thing he may have meant by this is a new theory, a theory that really came out of people thinking about this, something that was new at the time, something called Preformationism. And it's easily one of the wackiest moments from the history of science. The idea is that all beings that have ever lived were created at first when the universe was created, and were put inside of each other. Remember we asked this question half an hour ago, where does new life come from? How does something non-living become living? It's a hard question. You could invoke God to do this. Perhaps every time new life comes, God has to reach his finger into the universe and use God power. That seems like a bad theory. It's a bad theory if you're a scientist. It's also sort of a bad theory if you're a devout Christian, right? Do you really want God to be spending all of his time making living things come to be? It seems just like a bad theory. How else could we do it? And this solves it. This is a really popular theory that solves all the problems. All living things are made. They're just nested inside each other like a bunch of Russian dolls. Inside you are all of your future children, and inside them are their future children, and inside them, and inside them, and inside them, and it goes on and on. They get very small, but that's not so bad. We've seen small things before when we look in the microscope. Right, and so people then go on, once they suspect this is true, they start to look for evidence that living things are inside of us. Where would they be if they were inside of you? Well, they'd clearly be in the germ cells. They're either in sperm or in eggs. Everyone knows this is what you need to make new little mammals, is mammal eggs and mammal sperm. So let's look closely and see what we can find. And they find them. These are pictures drawn by microscope artists looking in and trying to see what's going on. It's pretty clear, in fact, that these things, not everyone can see them. But, some people have better optics and some people do. And there are many people who look in and see what's going on. And, I don't know, what weird theory. On the other hand, what a nice theory. It does explain quite a bit. Is it a good theory? Can I convince you it was actually a popular scientific theory of the day? Well, what would we need? How do we know if a scientific theory is a successful theory? And I'll make this claim. If people fight about the details, it's a pretty well accepted theory. Right? If I tell you I have a theory that every night the buildings at Central sink into the ground, you will think that's ridiculous. You won't say, well, which one do you think goes down first? Right? That is not a good argument to have. And the fact that people are fighting about this tells us something about it. It tells us that it was a popular idea. In fact, Preformationists quickly split into two camps, the spermists and the ovists. Where are the little beings? Which one? It can't be both, of course. Which one is it? And there are big names on both sides. Spermists include Buffon. He's another hero of mine. This is a guy who wrote the L'Histoire naturelle, the history of everything in the world, plants and animals and rocks. He also did some really interesting probability. Leeuwenhoek looked into the microscope and thought he could see little people inside a sperm, one of the first people who claimed he could do this. There's lots of stories associated with him. He tried to send his reports to the Royal Society. He was living in Amsterdam. He tried to send them over to London. He tried to explain this, but how do you put it in writing to a people of a proper age? He did take care to let them know in his letters that it was by no sinful contrivance he obtained the specimen. He instead rushed from his marriage bed to the microscope. The main argument on this side are two. First of all, the claim is they can be seen, and the other claim is, what else could it be? Do I think women have the power to do that? Clearly the vital force comes from the man. You know, we know who's making these arguments, and this is one of them. On the other side, however, is a completely different group, and Swammerdam is one of them. The egg is bigger, the egg is clearly a more nurturing place. He's also looked into fetuses, female fetuses, and found eggs in them already. So there's evidence that there's an ability to grow future people inside of unborn people, at least for women. And so maybe it is the eggs. Malebranche is the other one who catches on to this right away, just the same time Swammerdam is writing, and who tries to promote this theory. Even Albrecht von Haller, he would do a lot of other experiments about where life comes from. He's chopped out those tiny jellyfish, the Hydra, see what happened afterwards. Also, pretty convinced this is true. They went back and forth for some time. What makes more sense? Where can you see? Can you find evidence of heredity? Do children on average look more like their father, or more like their mother? Maybe just this alone should tell us. Eventually, of course, the theory will start to die out. We know we don't believe this anymore. And one reason is, like some of our ideas before, it's not a good scientific theory. It's not a theory that is testable. It's not a theory that makes specific predictions. It's almost more philosophy. And if that's true, eventually, it will probably leave us from science. But was it science in the first place? And it wasn't ridiculous, I think, to make this claim. There was visual evidence. They could see these little people. Now, we think they were mistaken now, but they didn't think they were making it up, right? They really thought they were believing their sense perceptions. There's also the logical fact that it's here. It just makes sense. It just makes sense that everything's pre-made, because it solves the problem of having to make new things. We also have this fact that really, really small organisms exist, and every time someone makes a stronger microscope, every time someone looks more closely to something else, they find something still smaller. Now, one big question we could ask from this is, did they believe that chain went on forever? Like Swift's lesser fleas on ad infinitum? Was it a common belief at the time that the smaller you went, the smaller organisms would go on, that would go on forever? I can't answer this question. I want to answer this question. So let me do what Euler wrote too, and I'm very curious, and I'm totally at a loss. If you have a source for this, let me know. And kind of it's testable. Kind of it's testable. You can take some germ cells that you think aren't fertilized and see if they can be induced to grow in some other way. And maybe in some animals they can, and maybe this suggests to us that something is sort of going on. At the very least, by the time we finish the theory of preformation, the stage is set for something to happen. We have some broad agreement at this point. The Earth is pretty old. It's been laid down in layers. Life has changed over time. Now that we know fossils are animals, and fossils are different in different parts of the Earth. And somehow new life does come from old life. We no longer need God at every step. There's some other way to do it. The stage at this point is set for Charles Darwin. What do we get by thinking about something like this? This is not a science talk. It's a history talk, and is it worthwhile at all to do this? We could take a minute or two and just reflect on whether or not this is a good thing to think about. You see, sometimes studying the history of science helps us because it teaches something about science. If you want to understand why the Earth goes around the sun, instead of trying to understand Einstein's theory of general relativity, we use Newton's equations. They're wrong, but they're easier, and they do kind of explain what's going on. If we want to explain something about the behavior of atoms, again, we try not to use quantum mechanics unless we have to. It's easier to understand if we don't. We can go on and on thinking like this. So sometimes simple models are just useful. I would also claim that our educational ontogeny recapitulates the historical phylogeny of a field. Usually, as you go through, the first thing you learn is really, really old ways of thinking. Right? Why do things fall? Well, because they have a natural place at the center of the Earth, kind of like Aristotle says. Why do they fall? Well, because we have Newton. Eventually we get to Einstein, but Einstein came later, and he comes later in our education too. And in physics and in chemistry and biology, we often sort of march through this, getting more and modern theories as we go. And maybe learning the old theories is a good way to do this. After all, humanity itself had to move through the old theories to get there. Maybe this is a good way to get students to modern thinking. Even more, I think it tells us something about the nature of science. If we study something like the work of Jan Swammerdam, if we study something like preformation, we see that science is not always cumulative. It's not the case that new theories build on old theories. Sometimes old theories and whole big bodies of knowledge are totally rejected and are thrown out. Science is not really always logical. People who are doing it usually think they are. when we look back in history, we sort of get the insight that perhaps they weren't as logical as they thought. And perhaps we can reflect on this for ourselves, be a little more careful, and find that science is just messy. It's weird and complicated and hard to understand, and it was hard to understand when people were doing it too. And I think one good way to see all of these lessons is in the work of Jan Swammerdam. His birthday was on February 12th. Thank you.